Hello and welcome to the Business Octopus, where we talk about all things sales, marketing, and technology. I'm Avon Collis, CRM and Marketing Automation Specialist at Relevate and all-around good guy. Today, I am joined with Christopher McNaughton from Secmon1, here to talk about how organizations can protect against insider threats. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. So yeah, a lot of times we've got a lot of stuff in the news about hackings of people getting sued for data breaches and all that sort of stuff. It's a crazy wild world out there. What are you seeing at the moment?
It's a bit scary, and there's a whole lot of things exacerbated the risk at the moment is you around insider threat. One of those is people working from home, having a bit more of a, relaxed attitude with the way they deal with sensitive information, but also not having the ability to go to the security leaders or their boss sometimes, or not wanting to bother them and say, hey, how should I manage this? And just trying to do the best they can. That's been an issue which has probably made bad things worse. What we have seen is the amount of data breaches we see is always increasing. And that's because that's where crooks can make money when they get hold of data, either by ransom or whatever else. But we also see data in itself expanding. The amount of data that organizations hold doubles every 3 years. And that's a frightening thing. And so if we've got a bit of a mess today, in 2 years' time, it's going to be twice as bad as ever, at least. I guess in essence, the things that we're seeing is essentially organizations don't really know where their data is. They don't know who's got access to it. They don't know who's touching it, what they're doing with it. And it makes it difficult because the data is where it starts. That sounds an ominous expression. It's mostly people doing the wrong thing, but for the right reason. Data, people not knowing what they're getting access to. It's a conglomeration of a couple of things, which is making things really risky.
Yeah, just looking at the outputs, I'm getting 3 or 4 spam callers a day. You're seeing now Telstra advertising the fact that they've blocked stuff in the background that you haven't received. Some of those can be just a good guess. They've run a mobile phone number generator. Other times it can be very targeted. And I think that everybody's very aware of some of the outputs, but then there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background that they're not aware of. For example, now you've got ads which talk about a children's app asking for your mother's maiden name and the color of their hair. I guess it's designed to sound a little bit humorous, but also very intrusive. And that's exactly the way that these nefarious groups operate. But as you say, having that insider person who's trying to do the right thing. I know that we've got limited access to certain things and 2FA and a whole bunch of strategies, but sometimes people just go and download a spreadsheet of info because they think it's easier, or they're going to be able to move it from A to B on a thumb drive or something like that. So in terms of that, like, why do we need to keep the data safe? Obviously we've got some inkling of the impact, but how bad could it get?
Yeah, and look, you're right. Some of what we see is that people doing the wrong thing for the right reason, moving large amounts of data to a shared drive or to SharePoint or email or to their Dropbox account or something like that, thinking they're doing the right thing. But they're exposing it to significant risk, and some of that might be customer data, it might be company-sensitive information and so forth. But there's some compelling reasons why we obviously need to keep data safe. And one of those is obviously so that the business is secure and performs at its optimum. So if we're losing company secrets or losing customer information, the reputational damage of that is sometimes very expensive for the organisation. Some organisations just don't recover. But so for efficiency purposes and so forth, but there's also regulation. There's some organisations such as finance, super, insurance and so forth that APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, say you must do certain things. You must keep your data safe. In doing that, sometimes the larger the organisation is, the more difficult it is to keep these things under control. But sometimes it's the scale, it's the amount of people in the organisation. It's difficult sometimes to get that message to everyone and to get it consistently and in a timely way. But the other reason we need to manage our data is because we need to almost breach-proof our organisations. We've got to consider that at some stage we are going to have a breach. And unless we've got our information and our insiders, our employees, all on the one singing from the same page, that's going to be honestly intuitive. So having that same message and having the data where it should be and employees not sharing that stuff all over the place and not copying it out and so forth. That's critically important.
Yeah, I think people tend to think on a very surface level, basic version, like I mentioned with the getting a phone call or a dodgy email. But I don't think people really think of the impact of something. Imagine if everybody's salaries was leaked out to the entire workforce. Or what if everybody's the financial documents got leaked out and then all of a sudden that affects the share price? Imagine you leaked something out about a deal which then kills $1 million deal or multi-million-dollar deal, et cetera. Not to mention getting sued and fines, et cetera, as the end result on the coalface. So I guess it's definitely important. We're talking about insider threat here. There's absolutely no doubt that there is an external threat as well, in the sense that I think about every 7 seconds, there's an attempt. Every 7 minutes, there's one reported. So there are a lot more that happen than are actually reported. So the next issue is, how can companies make sure their teams are doing the right thing?
Yeah, this is I guess we were talking about this a little while ago. I mentioned to you that the concept of insider threat, it just seems to most organizations such a complex, such a difficult concept and thing to solve that they just leave it. They go, oh, just won't worry about it. But it's actually not that difficult to solve. It's actually quite simple, but it comes to a couple of things. The foundational level of it is understand where your data is, understand who's touching it, what they're doing. So that's the first level, and maybe even classify. The second level is to get visibility of what's actually happening with the information, and that is overlaid with the risk. When we work with organizations, the very first question we ask them is, where are your crown jewels? What are you concerned about? What would happen if something happened in your organization that was to create a business disruption? What would it be? So that might be if we lose customer information. It might be if we lose that, as you were saying, those company secrets, so that merger that's just about to happen, or whatever it might be. That might be the critical information. So we say, okay, all right, we now know what we're worried about. How do we get visibility of that? And you've got to almost think, oh, I'm an ex-copper and I think like a crook. Sometimes it's very helpful. And you say, okay, if I was going to get that customer data out, how would I do it? And you've got to put two hats on there. One is the inadvertent user, that the user who's a bit less aware of what they should be doing. And the other is the malicious user, the person who's involved in corporate espionage. And they're two separate things. But if I just put that in perspective for a second, the inadvertent user, the person who's just trying to do their job, they're trying to do the right thing and mucks it up a bit, that's 99.9% of all the undesirable events we see. The malicious user is a tiny fraction of 1%. It does happen, but it's not massive. And corporate espionage is a tiny fraction of that. That allows you to gauge how you deal with the matters. And so for us, it's about visibility. So say, for example, someone was concerned about their customer data, as we all probably should be, then we say, all right, let's keep an eye on what's happening with your customer database. Let's keep an eye on what's going out via email. Let's keep an eye on customer records going out to FTP uploads to the internet. Let's keep an eye on that. And that's going to get us visibility of 99% of the vectors that we might see, of the ways that this data might get out. And when we know that, so when we've built on that, we know the risk, we know how the risk might be played out, then we can say, all right, we can get a handle on that by monitoring email and monitoring internet usage, and probably maybe bring in some HR information. So that helps us to very quickly get there. What's most important is visibility of what's going. And when we get visibility of it, and particularly when we start to look at, we know that 99% of users need to do the right thing, maybe get it a bit wrong. That means we can communicate directly with those users and say, hey, did you know, Frank from accounting or Bob from sales, that when you do that thing, that there's a better way to do it. And for us, for Secmon1, this isn't about being punitive or creating a police state or something like that. What it's about is guiding users, helping them back on track, helping them to understand the better way to use data and protect the organization and its information.
I can imagine as like a business owner or a business leader, particularly if you're a founder of a smaller company, you feel very connected to the people that you've hired or that are working for you. And you almost don't want to believe that they're doing the wrong thing. And even if you do, then that's probably not a healthy cultural environment either, in terms of distrust of your people. And that's not healthy. I think what you're doing is building an accountability cycle And from the bottom all the way up to the top, everyone needs to be able to handle data, because the rule needs to apply to everybody who's grabbing that piece of information, because those nefarious people look for those weak points, and it's the weak point they're going to go for, not the strong point. And you mentioned with your police background, for me with the military background, you think about sometimes people from those actors that are aggressively looking for those weak points, they will try to deceive and misdirect. And for example, there's nothing wrong with sending a vehicle over a particular hill to go and create a dust cloud to make the enemy think that you're moving in a particular area. I think just seeing higher levels of secure activity across the board can make the threat actor think twice, or go too hard, I'll look elsewhere. So
Yeah.
potentially that's a good disincentive as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's spot on. There's what we're all about is to ultimately change the culture in an organization. That's what we want to do. We want to uplift the security culture so that, and what we see when we're monitoring organizations, when we're monitoring employee activity and so forth, we might be monitoring a specific band of activity, certain types, but we actually see improvements outside that activity as well. So, for example, click rates and all sorts of other things. The way anecdotally we see positive steps is that employees will actually come up to the security leader and say, "Hey, I was thinking of doing this. Is that okay?" Whereas they would never have approached the security team before. To your point, though, in Australia, we have a reasonably trusting culture, and I think that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah,
and we need to encourage that. And so, sometimes when people think about monitoring employees, it's hang on, no, we're intruding on their privacy or whatever. We're actually not. What we're doing is we're helping to guide them back, because every employee, pretty much almost without exception, wants to protect the organisation and so forth. So we all want to do the right thing. It's just helping them do that. The two things which we see are reasonably ineffective now is things like the security awareness posters and audits.
Yeah,
we almost don't see it now.
Yeah,
it hasn't been changed for the last 3 years. The security awareness training that we've got to do, and I think we've all done it. You click through it as quick as you can. You've gone through all the videos, and you have a crack at the test at the end. And I think we've all done it. We shouldn't do it.
Yeah,
because for us, monitoring and making users aware of where they might have slightly gone off policy is about almost real-time security awareness. It's almost guiding them back. And for us, when we're speaking to a user, it's probably that same day they did that thing. It's not 6 months later. So it's very relevant to them, and it's really timely.
Yeah, I think in terms of keeping people accountable, and that, I think it removes that any question or that doubt or that ambiguity. I implemented a time clock in, clock out thing, use facial recognition scanning. And it also pushed their rosters to them. And at the end of the day, when they clocked in was when they clocked in. There was no question of it. Like if on the sheet with the pencil, a 2 would look like a 7, or maybe they'd written down a time that they were there that was before when they actually turned up. There was room for questioning whether or not they did the right thing. There was room on both sides for questioning. But when it became empirical and there was no question in either direction, the relationship became much, much better. Because if they were late, if they were early, if they were on time, they're on time. There is absolutely no, if they worked overtime, they got overtime. So there was no doubt or question that the right thing was being done. So you said, that relationship with staff, I think, is definitely will improve.
And when we had empirical data, honestly, I think that's key for us. We've all spent a lot of money on things like security awareness, and we have, one of the issues that we see is that people trying to solve the insider threat problem is that they get every log that the organisation produces and they put it all into a log correlation engine, and it just sits there and nobody looks at it. And got a big tick as well, and we've got these logs.
Yeah.
I guess the two things here. One is that the insider threat thing isn't a technology problem. It's actually a people problem. It's not even a problem. What is a problem? It's a people problem. It's very hard to measure empirically. When I put that security awareness post up or we do that training, what change has been in the organisation? Good luck with that, because it's very hard to measure.
Yeah.
When we start monitoring with an organisation for the insider threat piece, we measure to start with what's happening today, what's happening this month, and we see 8 or 90 data leakages, and we start to address it via various means.
Yeah.
And within 3 or 4 months, that'll come down to three months. And so it's obviously much more manageable, but
Yeah.
it's all measurable data. So if you can't measure it, to me, is it actually happening? But we measure it. So because it's
And more data is the currency in business. So you need to be making decisions on facts, not gut feel. And then as the organization grows, gut feel becomes irrelevant because now you don't have visibility on every little minute thing. So it's a necessity. That's been an amazing chat. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we check out today?
no, I guess just that one thing where the insider threat sort of things is, as I mentioned, seen as a very difficult problem and almost impossible to fix.
Mm.
We know we go to our organisations, global organisations, and we know. So one of our products is called Shadow Site, and that's our insider threat tool. And so we know where we implement that, and when we start to look at insider threat, we make dramatic changes and very quickly. I just encourage people to ask a question: what's possible? What can we do? Because there's things organisations can do without almost costing any money to improve the issues straight off the bat. So ask questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been absolutely awesome to hear from you and about all of the security issues that people can resolve with a couple simple things. So if you want to find out more about Secmon1 and improving organizational security culture, you can go to secmon1.com. And as always, the website and Chris's LinkedIn will be in the episode comments. So thank you again for listening to the podcast. And if you have any questions or you'd like to be on the show, you can go to relevate.com.au and fill out a contact form. Otherwise, thank you for listening and take care.